Today we'll be talking about how mobile technology is changing consumer behavior, and we've got some great case studies. I'm a case study dork. I love to see how it works, how it plays out. And so we're going to be learning some things about Facebook. I'm sure everyone here has heard of that interesting company. USAA, which I'm actually a ex-naval officer and have used USAA since I was 16 years old, and I think it's one of the best user experience perspectives out there from a website and a mobile perspective. We're also going to be hearing about an app that was done for Ole Miss, as well as Style Blueprint. So a local company is in the mix. So please give a warm welcome to Bill Tallent and Paul Stanley.
Thank you very much. I don't know why Paul asked me to do a perspective on mobile, how things used to be, so I won't take that as an insult, Paul. It could be that he asked me because this is where my career started for you millennials. That's a punch card. And this is where my career is today. Oh, excuse me, it's not. Here's where my career is today. So I'm going to try to give you a perspective on how we got here. And I've got to learn how to use my iPad first. Okay. First, let's start at where we are, and then let's backtrack just a little bit. We actually live in an amazing world. We live in a multi-platform world, a multi-screen world. We use screens now from this size all the way up to the 80-inch living room TV screen. A world that's digital first, mobile focused, and millennial driven. Why millennial driven? Well, they've got the money, and they spend the money. It's an amazing world we live in that didn't even exist 7 years ago. Our lives literally are centered. They revolve around this device. In the morning, I get my news on my iPad. Then I use this all day long. And in the evening, I use my iPad again. It is the source for searches. It is the source for information. It keeps us connected. We can connect with anybody in the world all the time with these devices. Actually, entertainment is the #1 use case for these devices. We watch movies, we listen to music, and the bottom one, control, is where this whole thing is headed. There is a growing expectation that this device will not only inform us, connect us, and entertain us, but it will control everything else in our life, and I'm going to show you some examples. So, how did we get here so fast? In 7 short years, our lives are just different. So basically, it was a combination of software and hardware. Let's look at the two. Software. Apple, as you know, is the world's most valuable company. But in 1967, IBM was the world's most valuable company, and guess what? They both got there the same way. Apps. Now, I know that most of you grew up in a web world, but actually, computing has always been an application world or an app world. And both IBM first and Apple, who actually copied IBM's business model, created the world's most valuable company by creating an ecosystem of apps that drove hardware sales. In the 1960s and 70s, IBM built applications like crazy. I worked at Genesco back then, and they had 3 full-time engineers free sitting in our offices building apps. Why? Because they knew if they built enough apps, we would buy more and more hardware. So they became the world's most valuable company that way, and Apple simply copied what they did. When Apple wanted to invent a new computing system, they first invented an app ecosystem, a business model that would drive hardware sales, and you know the rest. Now, if you watched The Imitation Game, You saw this computer. It's Alan Turing's Enigma machine. Computing actually started back in the 40s, and then it grew in the 50s and 60s. This actually is the first IBM mainframe that I ever programmed, and it was apps that drove this computer. You see down on the lower left the circuits. This actually is a circuit I rescued out of that computer before it went to Steiner Lift Junkyard. Had 8 vacuum tubes across here. There were 2,000 of these circuits, so 16,000 vacuum tubes. It created so much heat that in the winter, Genesco back in those days heated 40% of the building with just the heat off of those vacuum tubes. This is part of the memory I got out of its brain before it went to the junkyard. This is about 1 character of information, and the smartphone you've got in your pocket or your purse right now actually has memory in it that is equal to 1 billion of these. So if you can imagine how big 1 billion of those would be, that's about the size of the memory that your cell phone has today. Well, after the mainframe years, Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC they were called, came along with mini computers, and it meant a lot more people could use computers than with the mainframes. And then that was followed in the 1980s when IBM, well, they actually didn't invent the PC. Radio Shack actually was ahead of them, but IBM took it big time. That was a big, big development. So, at that time, Apple was an also-ran in computing. Microsoft and IBM had done Apple in personal computers, so Apple had to change the game if they were going to become a large company. So they began to develop the iPad. And they had the iPad, they had developed the app ecosystem, had not announced any of this, and they were well on their way to developing the iPad, and they begun to think, now if we take this iPad and we take it to market, and the world has never seen anything like it, it's going to be tough for people to visualize how they can use an app on a device like this. They saw the success that BlackBerry was having, so Apple shelved the iPad and developed the iPhone. And that iPhone, as you know, became a device that changed the world. And when the iPad later on was announced, we all knew what it did, right? Because we started with the phone. So it's very smart to move on Apple's part to bring this app ecosystem first into a device that we all knew and needed. Now, if you weren't here today, or let me say at least for me, if I wasn't here today, it's about noontime, and Apple is announcing all the details about the new Apple iWatch today. And we'll get to, I'll get to see it tonight. And this is an exciting development. It's just evolutionary. We started with Alan Turing's machine, and we've just progressed on, and we've now gone to the wrist in terms of computer sizes. I wish I could tell you more about them, but we're about to release 2 applications for the Apple Watch. The Apple Watch requires applications, by the way, just like the phone requires applications. And we'll be releasing, when the Apple Watch goes on sale, 2 different applications from 2 different companies, and I can tell you that they don't tell time. What they will do, the watch will control another device that's very important to you in your life, a device that today you control with other kinds of devices. Exciting time to be alive. Now, that's the hardware and software story that got us to where we are today in mobile. But we're regularly asked questions about 2 other things that are sort of tangentially connected to mobile, so I want to address them. Websites. A lot of you grew up in a website world. They had a great 20-year run, But when websites were when they first went mainstream in the mid-90s, they were very poorly understood. Nobody understood what their place in our lives was going to be. So everyone made this mad dash to get on the web, create a website, and get, quote, hits. That was the terminology of the day back then. Get on the web, get hits. But nobody thought about a business model behind websites. They just ran headlong into websites. And a lot of people paid a big price for having done so. It was disastrous to the content industry because every major newspaper immediately threw up all their news for free on the web. Even though they were selling newspapers, they had no way to sell the web. And the result was, we've got to monetize these things, let's put ads on them. And that started. There was a gold rush for ads. Ads were all of a sudden interfering with the user experience. They were blinking at you, they were shouting at you, they were aggravating you in every way possible. The user experience began to devolve, and we just had to take it because there was no alternative. You would get an article to read, and guess what? You had to go through 7 pages because they could show more and more ads that way. So, the other question that I frequently get asked is, why are we willing to pay $800 or $900 for this device every 2 years, and we do it willingly when we used to pay less than half that for a laptop? And there's a simple answer to that question. It's the very same reason my grandmother bought this device in 1925, and I don't know what she paid for it, but it was somewhere between $25 and $50, which was serious money in 1925. Serious money. As a matter of fact, in today's dollars, it would be something like $700. Why did Granny do this? She did it because it made her life better. It was just more convenient, and that's why we willingly spend so much money on these devices now. So, where are we? Back to 2015. If you want to reach consumers, you can reliably reach them on mobile devices. Websites are not dead. They're just no longer the preeminent source for information. They were killed by that greed for running ads on websites. If you want to engage consumers, once you've reached them, you'll do it with a native app for each relevant platform, and Paul will talk to you more about that. Privacy, well, I grew up with it, but you can just forget it. There just isn't any privacy. There's not going to be any privacy. Get used to it. Get over it. It's just the way life is. Now, you millennials won't understand the Dick Tracy reference there. I grew up on the Dick Tracy cartoon, and I know some of you here grew up on Dick Tracy too. You won't admit it. That's okay. Dick Tracy had this great two-way wrist television, and you're going to see that very, very soon on your wrist. The Apple Watch is going to enable you to get a text, hit a button, and speak an answer. It'll digitize the answer and send it back. That's the first step, but it won't be very long before you're going to see it on your wrist. Now, a lot of people think Apple just fell into this stuff. Actually, Apple probably does more long-range planning than any company I have ever seen. So this morning, I grabbed a book, and I did a photo out of a page of that book from 1982. So in 1982, Apple was working on a wrist telephone. So these things don't happen just overnight. It takes a long time for this technology to develop. Smartphones are going to increasingly, as I said, control things. They're going to replace keys. They're going to replace credit cards with Apple Pay, as you know. And Android had it long before Apple. Here's an interesting one. Last week, when I was supposed to be here, on Thursday. It was cold as hell outside, and I wanted to warm my car up, so I pulled up an application that I have on my phone, which is right there, and I started my car. I've got a Hyundai Sonata. If I were starting the car this week, I'd be starting it with a watch, because that application this week went on to a watch. So the expectation is we are going to control everything in our lives with these devices, and we're going to be carrying less things. Have you heard of the term, the Internet of Things? That's the new hot term. The Internet of Things is using smartphones to do the kinds of things I've just been telling you about. And the things they control are going to explode in comparison to the phones themselves. Now, this is a slide developed by Intel, and Intel's projecting that by 2020, 5 years from now, there will be about 10 billion of these worldwide. There's 7 billion people, by the way. There will be about 10 billion. But in terms of the Internet of Things, the kinds of things that these things control, we're developing apps right now to control cameras in your home, to control door openers so you'll know when a door opens in your home, to control the lock on your front door and the thermostat on your wall. We've heard projections of as high as 75 billion things that are going to be controlled by these things in comparison to 10 billion apps. And they all need an application. I love it. Looking forward, expect apps, as they started way back in the 40s, expect apps to continue to proliferate. And Holy Grail apps, which is what Paul's about to start talking about, are those that consumers will use frequently for long periods of time. And Paul's going to talk to you about how those are developed. Don't want him to take my punch card.
All right, thank you, Bill. How about it for the oldest teenager I know? All right, so as Bill alluded to, so what now? You know, we're a combination of strategy, but we're a lot of application folks here in this room, right? So what does this mean for us? What does this mean for when you go home today? What is that going to make a difference in terms of your business strategy, what you're planning on, how you're planning on interacting with potential clients, existing clients, lapsed clients? So that's what I'm going to talk about here, given the wonderful arc of technology talk that Bill gave. So to begin with, I'm going to talk about three things to sort of get launched into one small section of mobile. And just to be fair, this is trying to figure out what out of the 10 years of mobile experience that I have, try to fit into this audience. So this is a subset, and most of the answers, like most things in life, is it depends. But I'm going to make some assumptions and roll forward here. So to begin with, you're going to need a website that's responsive to mobile. Now, you'd think that this isn't something that I should be telling anybody. These are some of the web traffic numbers of several websites last fall. And the only issue is, the problem is, this is unfortunately somewhat of an eye chart, but it shows what percentage of websites in that same time period were responsive to mobile devices. So either responsive web design or having a dedicated mobile site. And what you're seeing there is a number of concentric rings. The blue is the mobile responsive site. So reality is still outstripping what we see in websites. So the story is here, you got to start first in making sure your website is not just capable of being viewed on a mobile device, but actually a pleasure to be viewed on a mobile device. So you've got your website, And like websites are primarily used for now, they're really great for direct response. We all have ways that we're reaching out, either through social media, through advertising, through email campaigns, where you need to have a link for a direct response. And they're still great for that. But if you need to engage somebody for longer periods of time on a mobile device, you need an app. So this is some data from last year that was put out by Adobe showing the relative amount of time people spend on apps on their mobile devices versus websites. The blue and orange is tablets and phones respectively, just to show you that it doesn't make any difference what the form factor is of the mobile device. The difference is still there, and it's at least triple the time spent on apps versus websites. So that leads to the somewhat relative conclusion that you need an app, but there's a problem with that. Your app has to be good. So this is numbers from about a year and a half ago that shows the typical abandonment rate, for lack of a better term, of apps that are on your phone. And I'm sure we all have examples from our own mobile devices of apps that we've downloaded, we may have used once or twice, and then we've stopped using them for one reason or another. So you're always fighting against this in terms of what else is competing for that user's mind share and time on their mobile device. So with that 3 slides sort of launching into my subject, I'm here to give you some nice clickbait. 4 keys to mobile app success. So that's all you need to remember, 4 keys, and click here and I'll take you to wherever you need to go. So the first keys, reputation is everything, right? So the thing about apps is they're all in public app stores. And these app stores are all user-focused in terms of, hey, you can actually give an app a rating. So what you see is that you've got the chance of rating with stars and being able to give text. And we all, whether we want to admit it or not, pay attention to app ratings when we are deciding what apps to download. The examples I'm about to show you are all in the same vertical. They're all media apps. So what you see here in the first example is someone who's done somewhat of an okay job. They've got some really large number of 5-star reviews. Unfortunately, a large number of 1-star reviews. So 3.5 stars, it's not terrible, but it's not great. So you can sit there and a user can look at another app. Same type of information, but wow, okay, 4.5 stars. Wow, look at those number of 5 stars. Now, what I can tell you about these companies is they're both media companies. The first one I showed you was a traditional media company that has not made the transition to mobile quite as successfully as the second one, which is did not exist, and their only business model is mobile. So they are a mobile native media company. So you can see sort of just through the apps and how well they've done, how hard it is for traditional companies to make that transition to what makes apps successful. And with the app stores, you're exposed to that risk in a way that most folks are not used to in the web world or other distribution worlds. So the third sample I'm going to use here is the thing about the App Store ratings is that they don't go away. And this is an example where they obviously had some struggles, a lot of 1-star app ratings, but the more recent ones are 5 stars. So you are always going to end up being burdened, even though with some app stores like Apple, you're given the choice of looking at the current version or all versions. So this is yet another traditional media company that has struggled. And so once you, whatever you put out there, you have to make sure that it's a great app, not just a good app, or you're going to end up with a reputation that's really hard to overcome. Okay, so outside of app stores, I now want to cover sort of what you can do strategy-wise when your reputation is at stake. So the mobile device is the most personal device that we've known in our lifetime. And because of that, the brand image that is felt on the mobile device is more powerful than a magazine, more powerful than a newspaper, more powerful than TV. And so it can affect the reputation of your brand, and the experience that you present on the mobile will impact that reputation of your brand. So I'm using the case study of Ole Miss, a little university over in Mississippi that some of you probably know a lot more about than I do. But Ole Miss has a somewhat of a unique issue where even in their name, Ole Miss, it doesn't really speak well to the modern research university that they are. So as part of their attempt at changing their brand and their reputation, they wanted to create a mobile experience that reflected how modern they were and how forward-thinking they were. And they put out an app that's on iPad, iPhone, Android, tablets, and phones. And they've actually had quite a bit of success. This was the results of a survey done from app users. And it just shows you in the word cloud for what does this app, describe to me what this app means to you. It sort of shows you the passion that people had for how easy it was to find information about the university, which is exactly what they wanted to do. Because that information that they're feeding these users are stuff that is hopefully changing their perception of what Ole Miss is as a university. So it's also paid off well in the App Store ratings. So you can see both, and these are screenshots taken last week, so they're up to date. 4.5 stars for each one. It gives them a lot of organic acquisition in the app stores. So I don't know if any of you guys have gone out and looked at a university app, but if you type in Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Alabama, Auburn, Ole Miss, you'll get quite a few apps. There's a lot of folks out there that have those university names in their title. Most of them are sports app, but that's where this app will pop up higher rated than these other apps, giving Ole Miss the opportunity to, again, influence people that are interested in the university. So, and perhaps the strongest evidence is represented by their monthly unique users. So if you remember that chart that I showed you about app retention, this shows that they have been able to not only acquire a mobile audience, but they've been able to retain that mobile audience. And this is over a period of 2 years. And it's still going very strong. So I'm using Ole Miss as just an example of someone who's gone out there, executed very well with a great app, been able to impact their brand, and being able to inform their multiple audiences simultaneously. All right, so that's about reputation. So next is exploiting the advantages of mobile. So one of the hardest things that we continually see with companies moving to mobile is the fact that mobile isn't just a browser on a handheld device. This device that we all use now has all of these things that PCs and laptops don't have. They have cameras, they have GPS receivers, they have accelerometers, all of these things that make them much more powerful and much more integrative into the user experience. So this is, as I said, the hardest mindset to really change is like, how can you change what you're doing in a digital medium and make it more powerful on mobile because it's on a phone? So this is where I'm going to use the example of a local company called Style Blueprint. How many of you guys know who Style Blueprint is? All right, good show of hands. So they're very much a curated fashion, curated restaurant, curated event company that was started here. It's now expanded to multiple cities. They built their success on email and their website. But they, like a lot of other companies, said, you know, we really need to figure out a way of catering to our audiences on a mobile device. Now, they could have just said, okay, we're going to take our website and make it mobile responsive, or maybe even create an app that duplicates our website. But they didn't. So what they did is they went, what we have and what we can create is what they're calling now the Style Blueprint Guide. So they're taking everything that they had on their website and they're creating a guide, much like Yelp, much like all these other user reviews and Googles that you're using to find a restaurant, to find a retailer, to find an event. they're offering that to their audiences on their phone so that it's location enabled and giving them the ability, no matter where they are in their cities, to find something that is Style Blueprint recommended, which is what they know their audiences respond to the most. So what they did in addition to that, so they made the decision of putting the guide on there, they also are using a new technology called beacons. So the way they're doing that is, this is when you install the app, you get this wonderful notice saying, hey, be a Style Blueprint Insider. And traditionally that's been, hey, give me your email and I'll send you emails of what's new and what's happening, right? Well, they're going a step further and they're saying, listen, on the next screen, say yes to location services, and I will give you personal savings that's only available to Style Blueprint in some of the retailers that we have. So the next screen comes up and says, hey, we'd like to use your location, is that okay? So what they've done, in addition to the guide, is basically give them another value to their audience and saying, listen, not only do you get the emails, but when you walk into a Style Blueprint reviewed or approved retailer, you will have the ability to receive special discounts only available to Style Blueprint users, which is a huge leap from just being an email and a website company. All right, so going on to the third one is great design is mandatory. So you've probably heard this a lot before. There's not as many pixels in a phone as there are on a website, and you really have to pay attention to your design. So I'm going to give you a few examples here of different types of design things that you have to take into account to make your app a great app and not just a good app. So this is an example of the use of a hamburger menu. Now, for those of you not into user experience or user interface design, the hamburger menu is taking the mobile world by storm, and it's being used a lot of times to hide functionality behind a more simple front end, so that don't clutter up the main screen with a lot of options. So this is an example of the hamburger menu. It's already moved over the main screen so to see your options. So what this app developer did is redesigned it to use the tab bar. Now what's ironic about this is when apps first came out 6 years ago, the tab bar was the standard. If anyone can go back and remember what almost all the Apple apps looked like, they all had that tab bar down at the bottom. So they decided to take a lot of that functionality and put it down in that tab bar and make it more visible. So what did they end up with? Doubled the number of sessions. The time engaged, spent engaged was increased 70%, and a great increase in active daily users. So this is an example of how just a small change in design can really have a huge effect, and perhaps a more disproportionate effect than it would on a website. So your stakes are higher in mobile. So the next example is Facebook, and what you see here is an animation for waiting. And if some of you aren't familiar with it, don't feel bad. It didn't get implemented. And I'll tell you why. So this is the standard, which you probably are familiar with. Oh yeah, I've seen that waiting icon. So what Facebook found out, and they did this through private studies without putting it out into the public, but what they found out is when they used their customized animation, people assumed that the waiting was the fault of the Facebook app. But if it was they used the default icon animation, they were more likely to attribute the delay to the phone or the network connection and not Facebook. So this is where mobile has a lot of advantages with animation, right? And I don't know how many of you guys remember when the iPhone was first announced and the first time you saw the inertial scrolling of when it continued to scroll after you released it and the way it bounced when it got to the end, right? It's one of the huge advantages of mobile is those animations. But this is an example of you really have to make sure you're doing your homework when using those to make sure that they're actually contributing to your goal and your success and not taking away from it. So the last example is something you've already seen. So it was, how do you make sure that your user experience is as good as possible? There's a lot of things on mobile that you don't have an option of. If you want to use location services, this screen has to show up in your app. You have no control over the wording, the placement, how it looks, but what you can do is what Style Blueprint did, is put something before that screen to educate the user so they understand the value to them of saying yes or no on the next screen. Again, really thinking through the user experience design, not just the visual design. All right, so number 4, keep it simple. So this is yet another big Achilles heel for a lot of companies moving from the web world to the mobile world. Websites were, for lack of a better term, very easy to cram a lot of crap in, right? No matter what it was, oh yeah, I'll just add another menu over here, another drop down there, and so people had to come up with sitemaps to be able to find everything, right? And so that tendency is not very conducive to mobile success. So I'm going to go through several ways of keeping it simple. So the first one is visual design. So even in mobile, in the time that we've spent developing apps, the visual design has become simpler. So an example of this is an app here that shows you the design that was used for iOS 6 versus the new app, same functionality, same company, but the design is for iOS 7. And that big change in iOS 7 was the biggest change in the visual design since the iPhone was released. And it's to a flatter, more simple visual design to basically give the ability of these folks to make their apps look simpler and make it easier for the user to understand the functionality. So the next keep it simple is use cases. And I've sort of talked about this around the edges on some of these other points. But what you're seeing now is a lot of these very successful mobile companies that were mobile sort of juggernauts, always in the top 10 list. So you see folks like Foursquare. How many of you guys are familiar with Foursquare? All right, that's good. That's a good sign. I like that. Sometimes I'm guilty of being in a Silicon Valley bubble where I think everyone's using Foursquare. So anyways, they have 2 use cases in that app. They've got checking in and they've got discovery, where you can find other things that are around you that are similar to things that your checking in has shown that you really like. And so what they decided to do was to take that app and create 2 apps, because they knew that as their app continued to grow in functionality and sophistication, they really had to keep those main use cases separated to keep it simple enough to be a great app. Right? So you now have Swarm to do check-in, you now have Foursquare to do discovery of what's around you, all using the same data. Right? So 2 apps using your same data. So the other example is Foursquare, and I'm not even going to ask you how many people have Foursquare on your phones. Facebook, thank you. So they've got a similar problem. Now they're relatively unique in the fact that they started off as a web company, and they have struggled. You don't hear a lot about the struggles of Facebook trying to move to mobile, but they did. They had sort of a lost year and a half as they really tried to figure out how to take that primarily web experience and take it to mobile. And now what they're doing is starting to separate a lot of that functionality into separate apps. So we all know Facebook Messenger and how they've been working on that for a year and a half and trying to move people over to that. They also have Facebook Paper, Facebook Groups. They've got 2 or 3 other apps, and all because they need to continue to create great apps, and keeping the use cases simpler makes it much easier to make those apps great because they're concentrating on one use case instead of multiple use cases. So the last keep it simple is an example in mobile payments. So we've all heard about Apple Pay, Google Wallet. I would love to ask how many people have used any of them, but I won't. They have not been a great commercial success yet, and I won't go into a whole lot of details why, but here's some data from a company in the fall of 2013. So a year and a half ago, a long time ago. They were doing at that time 4 million payments per week. That represented 11% of their sales volume, and over 8 million consumers were using their mobile payment system. Who knows who that company is? PayPal, no. Square, no. Starbucks. So it's a great example of a company that sat there and went, listen, we know we need to do a mobile experience. We've got a lot of interactions at our register. We need to figure out a way of really keeping it as simple as possible, but adding mobile payments. Now, you can make an argument that, well, what this really is, it's not payments, it's a preloaded card, it's a gift card. But what they really were able to do by focusing on simplicity is taking the complexity of that and putting it on the point of sale and the cashier rather than the user, right? So as the user, all you have to do is bring up the app and it shows you that barcode. And it's the cashier that has to go through the trouble or the complication of scanning that barcode, and then the point of sale does the hard work of actually taking that barcode and accessing the money that's attached to your account and completing the purchase. So that's an example of how you can take sort of what many people would think is a complicated use case and keeping it simple and reaching a lot of success. Whew. All right. So big pause, that's it. That's my 4 keys. Just remember, clickbait here. Reputation, exploit the advantages of mobile, great design is mandatory, and keep it simple. And so that's it. I think we've got time for questions, if we have questions out there.